Marina shuffled into the hushed courtroom, her heart pounding like a restless drum. She was far older than most of the spectators gathered there, late 50s, with streaks of silver running through her once jet-black hair. She had never imagined that, at this stage in her life, she would stand up in a public place and defy protocol. Yet the sight of the defendant, an exhausted woman in her early 30s with hollow eyes, propelled her forward. Marina's instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. The heavy oak doors had barely closed behind her when she suddenly raised her hand and declared in a trembling but resolute voice, "Stop this trial. I have information that will change everything." Her words struck the room with the force of a thunderclap. The judge, a man with sharp features and an unwavering gaze, froze mid-sentence. The defense attorney dropped his legal pad onto the table. The prosecutor, a stern figure in a crisp suit, stared at Marina with open disbelief. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was like thick fog rolling in, pressing against every corner. Then the gavel rapped, echoing harshly against the paneled walls. "Bailiff," the judge ordered, "escalate security if necessary, but I want this interruption dealt with." Marina felt a flicker of panic at the judge's tone. Yet a compelling sense of duty pushed her onward. "Your Honor," she said, voice taut, "please, don't throw me out. You have the wrong person on trial. I know who really committed the crime." Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd, a wave of hushed suspicion and curiosity. The defendant, seated at the defense table, turned a haunted expression toward Marina, as if searching for a lifeline. The judge finally cleared his throat, gesturing for calm. "Madam," he said more gently, "these are serious allegations. Who are you, and how do you claim to know this?" Before Marina could muster an answer, a uniformed bailiff approached, hesitating only because the judge had not explicitly ordered him to remove this unexpected witness. Marina's stomach twisted. She was simply a caretaker at a local retirement home. Why was she here, challenging a murder trial? Because her conscience wouldn't let her rest, that was why. "Your Honor," she said, swallowing hard, "my name is Marina Pierce, and I saw something no one else seems to have noticed." "Then we shall continue this in my chambers," the judge replied. He signaled to the bailiff. "Everyone else stay seated. The court is recessed until further notice." The onlookers stirred in restless confusion. Marina's heart pounded as the bailiff escorted her through a side door and into a narrow corridor. Moments later, she found herself in the judge's private chambers, a cramped room lined with law books and overshadowed by the judge's large mahogany desk. The judge walked in, shutting the door behind him. The defense attorney, the prosecutor, and the defendant's eyes were all on Marina now, each full of their own brand of suspicion. "All right," the judge said, settling behind the desk. "What do you claim to know?" Marina took a breath so deep it ached in her lungs. "This trial is about the murder of a man named Kevin Ross. You have Rhonda Daniels standing accused. But she didn't do it. I have proof, or at least a lead that can point us to real evidence." The defense attorney's gaze ignited with sudden hope. The prosecutor's lips tightened in an attempt to hide skepticism. The defendant, Rhonda, trembled almost imperceptibly, as if frightened to trust that help could arrive from a stranger. "I was at the park the evening Kevin was found dead," Marina continued. She would never forget that day. It had been a rare moment off for her, a walk in the fresh air to clear her mind from the stress at the retirement home. "I saw him with another person, not Rhonda, someone else entirely. A man I'd never seen before." She paused, remembering the figure's features. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. "At the time, I didn't realize who Kevin was, but in the days following, when I saw his picture in the local news, I recognized him. That night, the man he argued with had distinct scars on his right hand, and the conversation looked explosive. Kevin was shouting, that man was furious, and then they disappeared near a black sedan. Rhonda's name never came up in my mind until I read about her arrest." The judge steepled his fingers. "Why did you not come forward earlier?" Marina's shoulders sagged. "Because I wasn't certain what I saw mattered. I wasn't sure if the times aligned or if the argument had anything to do with the murder. But after reading the testimony in the newspaper, I realized it's impossible Rhonda was the one Kevin argued with. She doesn't match the man's height, obviously, and everything about the timeline is inconsistent. The official story says Kevin and Rhonda fought in public that very evening, but I saw him with a tall man, not a woman. Your Honor, the prosecutor interjected, this is highly irregular. At best, she's confused. At worst, this is a disruptive attempt to derail a legitimate trial. Marina turned pleading eyes toward the judge. I'm not lying. I just want the truth out. And there's something else. She pulled out a small plastic pouch containing a single silver cufflink engraved with the letters DM. I found this near the bushes by the walkway. I wanted to return it to Lost and Found, but something told me to keep it, just in case. The defense attorney's eyes narrowed on the cufflink. Do you realize how critical that might be if it doesn't belong to Kevin or Rhonda? The judge exhaled slowly. All right, I'll allow the defense to investigate this lead. Ms. Pierce, your testimony could be significant, but you need to understand we're deep into the trial. The prosecution has built a strong case against Ms. Daniels. Marina's heart twisted for Rhonda. The woman looked so fragile, so haunted. I understand. But if we've got an innocent woman on the brink of a wrongful conviction, don't we owe it to her to check every possible clue? The judge stared at Marina for a long moment before giving a slight nod. We'll reconvene with counsel tomorrow morning. For now, Ms. Pierce, thank you for coming forward. Outside, the corridors of the courthouse hummed with speculation. Marina felt a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She sensed that many people around her, maybe even the defense lawyer, wondered if her story was too flimsy. Yet she also realized that by speaking up, she might have risked more than her peace of mind. Criminal trials were complicated beasts, especially murder trials, and meddling with them could bring unwanted attention from dangerous parties. She looked over her shoulder and saw Rhonda being led away by an officer, presumably back to a holding cell. Their eyes met for the briefest second. In them, Marina recognized a silent plea that said, "Please don't abandon me now." Guilt weighed heavily on her as she drove home through streets lit by the dim glow of streetlights. She recalled an old saying her parents used to share when life got complicated. One candle in the darkness is still a light. Perhaps she was that candle for Rhonda, or maybe she was just an overconfident fool. Either way, she had done what she could. Yet the anxious knot in her stomach told her the real battle had only just begun. Long after midnight, when she finally fell into a restless sleep, her dreams were filled with half-glimpsed silhouettes and the echo of harsh voices. By morning, she knew she wouldn't rest until the truth was uncovered. That day, she made a quiet vow to do everything in her power to ensure justice prevailed, no matter how terrifying the road ahead might be. When she arrived at the courthouse the following morning, the scene was electric. Reporters were camped out near the steps, shoving microphones in the faces of anyone who looked relevant. Marina kept her head down, trying to avoid attention, but a few recognized her from the previous day's drama. "Miss Pierce," they shouted. "Is there new evidence? Are you testifying again?" She only shook her head and pressed through the crowd, heart pounding in her ears. Inside, the defense attorney, an older gentleman named William Crane, met her with a grave smile. "I'm glad you came back," he said quietly. "I've done some initial research on that cufflink. I can't say much yet, but it's not Kevin's. It's not Rhonda's either." Marina clutched her purse, feeling a tremor of both excitement and dread. "Then whose is it?" "That's what I'm hoping to find out." He gave her a meaningful look. "You might need to give official testimony on what you saw at the park, if we can link that cufflink to someone else with the initials DM. Meanwhile, I'll need the judge's approval to bring in any last-minute witnesses." Marina nodded. "I'll do whatever I can." Soon the courtroom resumed session. This time the energy was different. The moment Marina walked in, she sensed stares drilling into her. The prosecutor eyed her like an intruder on sacred ground, while Rhonda, out on bail for the duration of trial, sat quietly, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Mr. Crane rose to address the court, motioning respectfully to the judge. "Your Honor, we have new information that could point to a different suspect. I request that Ms. Marina Pierce be allowed to give testimony regarding events she witnessed on the night of Kevin Ross's death. Additionally, we have physical evidence, a cufflink, that merits further investigation." The prosecutor stood, face like stone. "I object. This is last-minute speculation from someone who merely claims to have seen an argument in the park. There's no direct link to Kevin's murder. The judge leaned back, fingers pressed together. Under ordinary circumstances, this might be quite a stretch. However, in a capital case, the court must carefully consider any information that might indicate another perpetrator. I will allow Miss Pierce's testimony, but I caution the defense that we need something more concrete. Marina's stomach lurched as she was called to the stand. She placed her hand on a worn Bible, promising to tell the truth. Once seated, she recounted her story for all to hear. She described how she'd been strolling through the park at twilight, how she had noticed Kevin, a man she only recognized after seeing him on the news, and how he'd been in a heated exchange with a tall male figure wearing dark clothes. She recollected glimpses of the man's scarred right hand and the intense argument. Then, in a trembling voice, she spoke of finding the cufflink near the nearby bushes. You cannot directly confirm it belonged to the man with Kevin? The prosecutor's tone was sharp. Marina tried not to flinch. No, sir, I can't. All I can say is I found it right after they disappeared, and it was near the footprints in the mud. The initials are DM. That's all I know. The prosecutor gave a dismissive snort, then turned to the jury. We must rely on facts, not coincidence or speculation. Yet she sensed she had struck a nerve. She could see a flicker in the prosecutor's eyes, a hint that this new evidence might be unwelcome. The defense attorney thanked her gently, then allowed her to step down. As she passed Rhonda's seat, the accused woman breathed. Thank you. Marina nodded, a swirl of empathy filling her heart. That evening, as she locked the door to her modest apartment, she couldn't shake a feeling of being watched. The hallway lights buzzed softly. She reminded herself that paranoia was natural after you'd defied a prosecutor in a murder trial. Still, her nerves were on edge. She double-checked the lock, then peered through the peephole. No one there. She finally exhaled and told herself she was just anxious. But later, an eerie scraping noise woke her shortly before midnight. She bolted upright in bed, heart pounding so hard it made her dizzy. Treading softly to the living room, she dared not turn on the lights. She stood in the darkness for a long minute, every muscle tight. Then she heard a faint click at the front doorknob. Someone was trying to break in. Her breath caught in her throat. She grabbed her phone, fumbling to dial 911. The operator's calm voice cut through her spiraling fear, and as Marina whispered her location, footsteps scuffled away from the door. Seconds later, her phone beeped, indicating a low battery. With trembling hands, she found a spare charger and plugged in quickly. When the police arrived, all they found were a few scratches on the doorknob, evidence of a failed lock-picking attempt. Marina filed a report, though the officers' expressions were non-committal. One gave her a sympathetic nod, but there was no tangible suspect. By the time dawn broke, Marina was wide awake and trembling with adrenaline. That morning, she resolved to share these events with Mr. Crane. Someone didn't want her interfering, and that pointed to something big. The next day, she cornered William Crane outside the courtroom and explained the attempted break-in. He let out a disquieted sigh. That could be simple coincidence, or it could be a serious threat. Either way, we should be vigilant. She nodded, feeling the gravity of the situation settle on her chest. How is the cufflink research going? Crane glanced around to ensure no one overheard. The letters DM might match a local figure with connections to Kevin Ross. There's a real estate developer named Dane Morris who's been rumored to have had disputes with Kevin. Kevin apparently wrote articles accusing Morris of unethical practices. If it's Morris's cufflink, that's huge. Marina's eyes widened. If that's the case, we have a motive. But how do we prove it was his cufflink? That's the challenge, Crane said grimly. We'll keep pushing. For now, be careful. The trial plodded onward. The prosecution paraded forensic evidence purporting to place Rhonda at the crime scene. They emphasized old arguments between her and Kevin, painting her as a jealous ex-partner who lost control. Marina watched with growing unease. Public sentiment was heavily against Rhonda. Even the local press seemed convinced of her guilt. In the visitors' gallery, she overheard whispers condemning Rhonda as if the verdict were already sealed. After court adjourned one afternoon, Marina stepped out into a sudden drizzle. She hurried under a nearby overhang, fishing for her car keys, when a tall figure in a black raincoat materialized beside her. She stiffened. At first, she thought it might be an officer or a fellow courtgoer, But then the figure lowered his hood slightly, revealing hard eyes and a single scar slashing across his right hand. "Stop poking around," he hissed, voice cold as sleet. "Unless you want to face consequences you can't handle." Marina's stomach turned to ice. This was the man she'd seen with Kevin, she was certain of it. The scar on the hand, the menacing aura. "Who are you?" she managed to say, heart in her throat. "Why are you threatening me?" He took one step closer, looming. "Some secrets aren't meant to be dug up. You might think you're helping, but you're making everything worse. Keep your mouth shut, or you'll regret it." Then he vanished into the curtain of rain, leaving Marina gasping for breath. She leaned against the wall, trying to steady her trembling knees. For a moment she wondered if she should run after him, call security, do something. But fear held her back. By the time she composed herself enough to move, he was long gone. She fumbled for her phone to call Crane. "I just encountered the man from the park, the one with the scar on his right hand. He threatened me again." Crane's voice crackled with alarm. "We'll report it to the police. Are you safe right now?" She nodded, though tears of fright blurred her vision. "Yes, for now. Go home, lock your doors. I'll alert the authorities and see if we can cross-reference that scar. We'll figure out who this man is." But going home held little comfort. Every passing car made Marina jump, every unfamiliar footstep in the hallway set her on edge. She recalled a comforting quote her father used to say, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it." She clung to that thought now, like a lifeline. Days turned to a week of half-sleepless nights. Meanwhile, Crane informed her that evidence was growing that Kevin had been embroiled in a series of exposés about shady real estate dealings. Dane Morris, the local developer, had reason to see Kevin silenced, but so might others in Morris's circle. If the man with the scar was connected to Morris, then the story was about more than a simple dispute between Kevin and Rhonda. It was about money, power, and cover-ups. One evening, after a particularly long day in court, Marina stepped outside to find the streets quiet and eerily still. Her breath billowed in the chilly air as she hurried to her car. Suddenly, headlights flared in her peripheral vision. A large SUV roared to life and sped toward her, engines snarling. Marina gasped and dove aside, scraping her knees on the pavement. The SUV missed her by inches, tires screeching, then vanished around a corner. For several seconds she lay there, stunned, her heart a jackhammer in her chest. A bystander rushed over, eyes wide with alarm. "Are you okay? That lunatic almost hit you." Shaken, but unhurt, Marina struggled to her feet. She brushed off the bystander's offers to call an ambulance, only accepting help to stand. Her knees stung, but adrenaline numbed the pain. She was sure, beyond any doubt, that this was no random reckless driver. Someone wanted to scare her, or worse. And in that moment, she vowed, "I won't be silenced. If anything, this proves we're onto something." When she reported the incident, the responding officer took notes and promised to file a report, but Marina saw apprehension in his eyes. People with deep pockets and unscrupulous methods often slipped through the system. She cradled her bruised knee and silently prayed for strength to see this through. Back in court the following day, the atmosphere grew heavier. The prosecution rested its case, confident they'd painted Rhonda as a scorned ex who had all the motive in the world. The defense began calling last-minute witnesses. Among them was a young journalist who had collaborated with Kevin Ross on investigating real estate corruption. He described how Kevin had uncovered embezzlement and illegal land grabs. He testified that Kevin had confided fears for his life, and that an unknown associate, someone answering the description Marina had given, was tailing him. Murmurs of surprise swept through the gallery. For the first time, the neatly packaged theory that Rhonda did it seemed to unravel. Rhonda wept silently, shoulders shaking as if relief and fear warred in her heart. Marina could hardly breathe, hoping the momentum would shift enough to save Rhonda. Then Crane requested permission to present new forensic findings about the cufflink. His investigators had tested it, discovered a partial fingerprint, one that matched a known associate of Dane Morris. The man had served time for assault many years ago, leaving behind prints in the system. Although he used an alias now, the real name behind that alias was dangerously close to the surface. This revelation caused the prosecutor to clench his jaw and exchange frantic whispers with his own team. The judge's eyes narrowed, a sign that the situation was indeed serious. "We'll recess for the day and examine this evidence," he said, banging the gavel. "Court will reconvene tomorrow at 9. Outside, the press descended like vultures. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. "Ms. Pierce, is it true you identified the real killer? Are you worried for your safety?" Overwhelmed, Marina mumbled no comment and fought her way past them. But a swirl of triumph and terror roiled within her. A sense of vindication sparked. If the cufflink and the fingerprint matched that scarred man, then justice might finally come for Rhonda. That night, she asked Crane to help her with extra precautions. He arranged for a friend on the police force to patrol her building. She felt a measure of relief. Even so, sleep was elusive. She kept replaying the day's events in her mind, wondering how far Dane Morris's influence reached, or whether the scarred man was acting alone. She remembered another favorite quote from her father: "Truth and lies cross paths many times, but only truth can finish the race." She held on to that bit of wisdom, letting it soothe her frazzled nerves. But as fate would have it, chaos struck at dawn. Just before the next court session, Marina exited her apartment building and discovered that every tire on her car had been slashed. Giant gouges marred the rubber, leaving them flat as deflated balloons. Her insides churned with shock and anger. She glanced around for any sign of a culprit, but the street was still. Another brazen warning, she realized. Clenching her fists, she called a taxi and refused to be delayed. In the courtroom, tension soared. The defense announced that based on the fingerprint analysis and a partial ID, they wanted to call Dane Morris himself to the stand for questioning about his associates. The prosecutor bristled, but the judge approved it, citing the new evidence's significance. A storm of speculation erupted. People began questioning whether Morris had orchestrated a murder to silence Kevin Ross, letting Rhonda take the fall. While the legal teams argued procedural points, Marina watched from the gallery. Her gaze flicked to Rhonda, who seemed stunned yet hopeful. Outside, Morris was an influential figure who had always presented himself as an upstanding philanthropist. If he was forced to testify, the entire city would watch. Shortly after lunch, Morris strode in with an air of authority. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, he approached the witness stand as though it was beneath him. Under oath, he admitted he knew Kevin Ross, acknowledged there was some tension, but denied any wrongdoing. Crane pressed him about the man with the scar, about hush money, about business deals threatened by Kevin's exposés. Morris remained calm until Crane brandished the cufflink in a sealed evidence bag. "Do you recognize these initials?" Crane asked in a steely voice. "DM, they certainly match your name." Morris's veneer cracked for the briefest moment, a twitch in his left eye. Then he smoothed it over. "I own many pairs of cufflinks, counselor. It's possible one went missing. That proves nothing." "Is it also possible," Crane continued, "that one of your associates, a certain Mr. Beck, or whatever alias he's using now, borrowed or stole this cufflink, and that he was involved in Kevin Ross's murder? Because Kevin's companion that night was a tall man with scars on his hand. You do hire ex-convicts, don't you?" Morris's lawyer objected in a fury, claiming speculation. The judge allowed a pause, glaring down from the bench. It was clear the entire courtroom sensed the tension. Marina's pulse throbbed. She recalled the man in the rain, the menacing stare, the threatening words. He worked for Morris. She could almost feel it. Morris was dismissive, yet a flicker of indignation in his expression betrayed him. "I have numerous employees, yes. I believe in second chances," he said with forced calm. "But any implication of wrongdoing is baseless." "Then you won't mind assisting the court in locating this particular employee so we can question him?" Crane pressed. Morris offered a tight smile. "I'll do whatever I can." The judge dismissed Morris, cautioning him that refusing to comply with a subpoena or lying under oath carried legal consequences. Morris left the stand in a swirl of arrogance, ignoring the cameras outside. Marina felt both relief and foreboding. They'd forced Morris into a corner, but she suspected a cornered man with resources could be dangerous. Soon enough, that suspicion came true. Late that night, as Marina painstakingly documented every detail for Crane, her phone lit up with an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Silence, then a low voice she recognized all too well. The scarred man. "You've crossed a line," he whispered. "Last warning. Drop this, or you won't live to see the verdict." Her blood ran cold. She wanted to scream at him or demand his name, but he ended the call. Shaken to her core, she promptly dialed the detective who had taken over investigating possible threats linked to Kevin's murder. She recounted the call verbatim. He assured her they were doing everything possible to trace it, to find the man behind it. The detective's tone held compassion, but also a note of frustration, as if the threads they were pulling kept leading to well-hidden corners of Morris's empire. The next day in court, the detective quietly signaled to Marina that they might have an address where the scarred man could be hiding. Police planned a raid, but he insisted she keep it confidential. Meanwhile, the trial intensified. Morris's attempts to stall the search for his associate only fueled suspicion that he was orchestrating a cover-up. In a dramatic twist, the defense called in the young journalist again, who verified Kevin had threatened to expose Morris's entire operation. They showed the jury emails between Kevin and an anonymous tipster, hinting at shady money laundering. The puzzle pieces were coming together, painting a picture of a ruthless scheme to silence Kevin. Rhonda's role, or lack thereof, finally moved into the spotlight. A forensics expert testified that phone records placed Rhonda miles away during Kevin's last known alive moment, contradicting the original timeline. The crowd stirred with murmurs of shock. Marina could hardly contain her relief. Evidence was shifting, aligning to suggest that Rhonda was a scapegoat, while the real killers lurked behind Morris's corporate shield. Then, in the midst of the session, an urgent note reached the judge. His face blanched as he read, then cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, there has been a development. Court is adjourned until tomorrow. Counsel, please see me in chambers." Though no official announcement was made, rumors spread quickly. The police had just apprehended the scarred man. Whispers abounded that he'd been found in a vacant building on the outskirts of town, apparently destroying potential evidence. Marina's pulse hammered with excitement, dread, and an odd sense of triumph. Could this be the break that would free Rhonda once and for all? That evening, Crane confirmed it. The police had arrested a man named Derek Matthews, initials DM. He had a record of violent offenses, had worked as a security contractor for Morris's development firm, and had ties to Kevin's final evening alive. Under intense questioning, Derek allegedly confessed partial involvement, claiming that Morris had ordered him to make Kevin back off. Kevin resisted, a fight broke out, and in the heat of that confrontation, Kevin was killed. Rhonda's name never came up until later, when someone twisted the facts, pinning the blame on her known arguments with Kevin. When court resumed, a wave of shock and relief rippled through the proceedings. The prosecutor, forced to reckon with these new confessions, moved to dismiss charges against Rhonda. The judge, with solemn dignity, declared that the justice system had to correct its course. With tears streaming down her cheeks, Rhonda murmured words of gratitude to anyone who would listen. Marina felt her own eyes welling with tears. One person's voice, she realized, truly could change everything. The entire gallery erupted in a mixture of applause and gasps when the final ruling was announced. Rhonda Daniels was free of all murder charges. Meanwhile, Derek Matthews would face trial for Kevin's death, and an investigation into Morris's role expanded. Authorities signaled that Morris himself might soon face criminal conspiracy charges. It was a staggering reversal of fortunes that left the city reeling. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters bombarded Marina with questions, but she had only one statement, voiced with quiet resolve. "I did what I hoped any decent person would do." As the days passed, more details emerged. Derek Matthews, it turned out, had systematically silenced multiple threats to Morris's empire. Kevin Ross had simply been the most vocal. Morris, exposed for orchestrating criminal cover-ups, retreated behind high-paid lawyers, but it became clear that no amount of money would shield him forever. The press dubbed the entire case the Morris Conspiracy, detailing how everyday citizens, like Marina, had stood up to wealth and power. In the midst of this public reckoning, Rhonda tried to put her life back together. She visited Marina's apartment one crisp afternoon, the two women embracing like old friends. Rhonda's gratitude poured out in her trembling voice. "You could have stayed silent. You risked so much for a stranger." Marina smiled, a gentle warmth sparking in her chest. "We were strangers," she said. "But that didn't mean you deserved to suffer a wrongful conviction. Some things are bigger than fear." Their conversation wandered to the future. How Rhonda might sue for damages. How her family might handle the emotional aftermath. How Kevin's legacy could be preserved through the truths he'd been uncovering. Marina didn't sugarcoat the struggles Rhonda would still face, from trauma to financial burdens. But at least the worst injustice had been averted. William Crane held a small gathering to celebrate the victory in the same park where Marina had first noticed the fateful argument. The place felt transformed now, redeemed somehow. A half-dozen supporters, including the young journalist, came to mark the occasion. There, under the gentle rustling of leaves, they toasted with simple bottled water and a few heartfelt words. People quoted lines that resonated with the middle-aged crowd. "Truth crushed to earth shall rise again," someone recited, an old sentiment that rang especially true now. Another offered, "Integrity is the only path that never leads you astray." Marina listened, a hand pressed over her heart. In the weeks that followed, Derek Matthews pleaded guilty in a move to lighten his sentence by cooperating against Morris. The city watched enthralled as Morris's downfall continued. Rhonda, officially exonerated, began planning a quiet memorial for Kevin, determined that his bravery as an investigative writer wouldn't be forgotten. And Marina, though she tried to settle back into her caretaker duties at the retirement home, found people whispering her name with respect. She was the woman who changed everything with her testimony. Yet not all scars faded easily. Marina sometimes woke at night certain she heard footsteps outside or the scratch of metal at her lock. Each time she told herself it was just a memory of what she'd endured. On the hardest nights, she remembered her father's gentle voice. "Fear has two choices: hold you hostage or push you to greatness." She chose not to be a hostage. Eventually, the murder trial of Derek Matthews commenced. Marina testified anew, her voice stronger this time. The prosecution laid out damning evidence, including the cufflink, the prints, and Derek's own confessions. By then, Morris had been charged with conspiracy to commit murder, among other crimes. For the city, it was an earthquake of accountability. For Rhonda, it was a bittersweet closure. Justice would be served, but Kevin was gone. When the jury returned a guilty verdict, Derek Matthews stared blankly ahead, the weight of his actions etched in his stoic expression. Marina felt no triumph, only a grave relief. Sometimes tragedy is unstoppable, but at least the aftermath could steer toward the truth. In the swirling chaos outside the courthouse, reporters sought final statements. Rhonda politely declined, though tears shimmered in her eyes. Marina gave a short response that ended with, "No matter your age, background, or fears, if you see an injustice, speak up. Silence only helps the wrong side." Later, as she and Rhonda walked away from the grand columns of the courthouse, sunlight broke through a patch of cloud. A sense of calm settled over them both. Marina turned to Rhonda, took her hand gently, and said, "There's a line I like. In the darkest times, even a small candle can shine brighter than the sun. I guess we were each a little candle." Rhonda nodded, lips trembling with emotion. "I can't ever repay what you did," she whispered. "But maybe I can carry that light forward in my own way." And so the story drew to a quiet close. Dane Morris's trial would be the city's next big spectacle, certain to peel back further layers of corruption. Rhonda began volunteering with a legal advocacy group that helped the wrongfully accused. Marina quietly resumed her work at the retirement home, caring for seniors who often looked at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Despite her older age, she had become a symbol of unwavering resolve. Perhaps that was the best reward of all, knowing that when she needed to act, she did. Long after the last cameras turned away, Marina found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. One evening, she sat on a park bench gazing at the setting sun. She thought about Kevin Ross, who had tried to expose the truth but paid with his life. She thought about Rhonda, who almost lost everything to a false accusation. Most of all, she thought about how fragile the line between innocence and guilt could be, and how vital it was that someone speak out. She recalled an old saying that felt especially apt. "Age wrinkles the body, but quitting wrinkles the soul." At her age, it would have been easy to say, "This isn't my problem," and return to a quiet life. But she didn't, and she believed that was what truly kept her soul unwrinkled, alive, and glowing with purpose. In the final quiet moments, she composed a short letter to herself, a way of making sense of her journey. Sometimes we fear we're too small, too old, too weary to make a difference. But the truth is, we always have a choice. We can huddle in the shadows, or we can hold up our candle and search for justice. The path may be riddled with danger. We may be threatened, hurt, misunderstood. Yet if we have the courage to shine, we might save someone who deserves a chance at life. And in saving them, we save a part of ourselves we didn't realize needed rescuing. Weeks later, on a crisp Sunday afternoon, she read that letter to a small audience at a local civic center, where she was invited to speak about her experience. The audience was mostly middle-aged or older, people who had lived enough to understand that life seldom grants perfect conditions for heroism. When Marina finished reading, the applause was soft but deeply felt. She left the stage with a grateful heart, deeply aware of the preciousness of every honest moment. And so the final lesson emerged, etched into her mind as clearly as any childhood memory. The measure of a life isn't in its years alone, but in whether those years are used to stand for truth, however inconvenient or frightening. And if there was one quote she wanted to pass on to others her age, it was this: to do nothing when you see injustice is to side with the wrongdoer, but to speak, even when your voice trembles, is to hold the world a little closer to the light. That was Marina's story. And it was also the story of all who dared to kindle a flame of courage in the darkest corners. Because in a world riddled with secrets and shadows, the smallest voice might yet ring the loudest bell. And that, she hoped, was a tune everyone could carry in their hearts, no matter how many birthdays they had seen. She learned that courage is not the province of the young. It doesn't matter if you're a child defying authority or a woman in her 50s stepping into a courtroom. Truth resonates across all ages, echoing in the halls of justice until the walls themselves must answer. That day, those walls answered. Rhonda walked free, Kevin's legacy found vindication, and Marina discovered that an ordinary person, guided by compassion and a fierce sense of right, could light up even the dimmest of trials. She would never forget that day she shouted in court, "Stop this trial! I have something to say!" And how those words, unexpected and raw, changed more lives than she could ever have anticipated. In that sense, she had found her place in the endless story of human decency and moral backbone, and for that, she would be forever grateful. At last she folded her letter, stood up from the park bench, and watched the sun slip below the horizon. The day might end, but the truth and its lessons would endure. She felt a calm pride, for she had learned, and taught others, that real justice demands everyday heroes, especially the unlikely ones. And there, in the amber glow of twilight, she reminded herself once more, a single candle, however small, brightens the night for all. There are moments in life when a seemingly ordinary person decides to stand up, speak out, and risk everything for the truth. In our story, that person is Marina, a middle-aged caretaker from a retirement home who chances upon an unsettling scene in the park, discovers a crucial clue, and ends up challenging the narrative of a murder trial. Although she is neither a detective nor a legal expert, her resolve becomes the catalyst that spares an innocent woman from a grave injustice. Let's explore the key lessons we can glean from Marina's journey. A story that reminds us that where there is courage, age is irrelevant, and the smallest voice can still echo powerfully in the corridors of justice. One of the first major lessons emerges in how Marina goes from reluctant observer to critical witness. Early in the tale, she could have easily dismissed what she saw, Kevin Ross arguing with a mysterious man near a car. Most people in her position might feel it's none of my business, or convince themselves that someone else will report it. Yet Marina cannot forget the tension in that encounter, especially once she learns that Kevin has been murdered and Rhonda, a vulnerable woman, is on trial for the crime. What this teaches us is the importance of listening to your instincts. When your inner voice nags that something is amiss, it's often right. In Marina's case, those instincts guided her to speak up, despite risking her safety and comfort. Another key takeaway is that being ordinary doesn't disqualify you from doing extraordinary things. Marina works in a quiet job, caring for seniors, living a life that by her own admission doesn't involve high stakes or legal drama. Yet she becomes the fulcrum on which the entire murder case pivots, because she notices the detail about the man's scarred hand, because she picks up the silver cufflink with initials DM inscribed, because she remembers the tense argument by the park. Her testimony challenges what looks like a solid prosecution. Too often we assume that great acts of justice or heroism must be performed by professionals, attorneys, investigators, or law enforcement. But this story proves that everyday heroes can spark pivotal changes. Even if you don't hold an official title, your courage and integrity can alter someone else's fate. Courage is not about having no fear. It's about acting in spite of it. Marina is not fearless. She is frightened almost every step of the way. Someone tries to break into her apartment at night. A vehicle nearly runs her down, and she's even threatened face to face in the pouring rain by the very man she saw with Kevin. Each threat amplifies her anxiety. Yet, as she recalls from her childhood or from meaningful phrases passed on by her family, courage means choosing not to let fear silence you. When the man in the rain snarls, "Keep your mouth shut or you'll regret it," she has every reason to back down. She could have fled the courthouse, hoping never to see the inside of a trial again. But she presses on, knowing Rhonda's life literally hangs in the balance. The story also underscores the value of persistence. Even when Marina's testimony initially seems too flimsy, just a cufflink, just a memory of a scarred hand, she refuses to let it die. With the help of an open-minded defense attorney named William Crane, she pushes for deeper forensic analysis and stands firm amid the prosecutor's skepticism. The critical breakthrough comes when the partial fingerprint on the cufflink ties back to Derek Matthews, an associate of Dane Morris, the real estate developer pulling the strings. Had Marina wavered? Had she given in to the countless people telling her there's not enough proof or you're just an amateur? The narrative of Rhonda's supposed guilt would have steamrolled to a wrongful conviction. Marina's tenacity shows us that if you truly believe someone faces injustice, you must keep gathering facts and pressing for the truth, even when all the evidence is not yet clear. Another poignant lesson from Marina's ordeal is how danger often signals you're on the right track. When someone invests time, energy, or threats to silence you, it often means you've uncovered a trail that could expose them. For example, the repeated attempts on Marina's car, break-ins, vandalizing her car, aren't random. They're clear indicators that her story, however uncomfortable for the powerful, is closer to the truth than the official narrative. Far from being frightened into submission, Marina takes these threats as confirmation that she must keep pushing. While none of us wants to be in danger, recognizing that intimidation tactics can be a sign of uncovering something significant can fortify our resolve. This story also speaks volumes about the power of collective effort. Marina's bravery alone might not have sufficed if she hadn't cooperated with Crane, the journalist who once worked with Kevin, and eventually the detective who helps verify the man behind the murder. The moment Marina shares what she knows, it sparks a chain reaction, an investigation into the cufflink, a cross-check of initials, a forensic match with a partial fingerprint. Each participant in the chain shares a piece of the puzzle. It's a reminder that standing up for what's right often requires building alliances and communicating openly. Like a puzzle, each piece of information can be crucial, and collaboration amplifies the chance of a breakthrough. Marina's role as a middle-aged caretaker challenges the notion that only younger or more outspoken individuals can shape the legal process. Far from it. Her maturity actually benefits the pursuit of justice. She relies on her life experience, her empathy, and her understanding of right and wrong, shaped by decades of observing human behavior. There's a touching scene when she quotes an old saying about courage in front of Rhonda, offering comfort and determination. This merges the softness of compassion with the fierceness of justice, proving that wisdom and compassion, often found in older adults, can be potent forces for change. Fear has two choices: hold you hostage or push you to greatness, Marina recalls. Even though she feels her heart pounding with dread, she chooses greatness over surrender. Finally, the theme of triumph through unity resonates when Rhonda is ultimately exonerated. The moment the court acknowledges that the real culprit is Derek Matthews, and that wealthy figures like Dane Morris might be responsible for orchestrating the crime, Marina's sacrifice pays off. Rhonda walks free, the corruptor exposed, and Kevin's true killers face the law. The emotional release is tangible. By the closing pages, we see how Marina's single act, "Baleo, stop this trial. I have something to say," cascades into a landslide of truth. In that sense, the story reminds us that one small candle can indeed pierce the darkness, encouraging others to light their own flames until the entire room is bright. In short, Marina's journey illustrates that age does not limit courage, that speaking out can save innocent lives, and that perseverance in the face of intimidation can unravel even the most cunning conspiracies. When we talk about holding the world a little closer to the light, her willingness to step up for Rhonda is precisely how that light breaks in. She shows that we can all be instruments of justice, no matter how ordinary we believe ourselves to be. In the words of a timeless saying often shared among those in their middle years, "Age wrinkles the body, but quitting wrinkles the soul." Marina's story brims with that truth. She doesn't quit. She doesn't let fear push her into silence. Instead, she stands firm and insists that, even without a badge or a law degree, her testimony deserves to be heard. And hear it the world does, leading to real transformation. Whether you're tuning in today as a retiree, a busy parent, a college student, or someone navigating middle age, remember Marina's example. If you see a wrong, voice that concern. If you possess vital information, speak it. None of us are too small or too old to affect real change. The next time you doubt your impact, think of Marina, a caretaker who, by trusting her conscience, helped guide an innocent person away from an unjust fate. And that is the most powerful lesson of all.